We'll go ahead and get started. Good afternoon and welcome to the Alfred University Bergren Forum. My name is John Angelo and I am a professor of chemistry and the coordinator for the spring 2024 season of the Bergren Forum. Anybody who is near my computer, if you could please hit the mute button on the top left-hand side of the keyboard, that'd be awesome. Thank you. Today is Thursday, April 25th, 2024. And for those of you attending the forum online here in Western New York, it is an absolutely beautiful, sunny, but a little bit chilly day. And here inside Powell Campus Center in the Nevins Theater, it is warm and cozy. And of course, there is, as there always is, free coffee and tea. Throughout the semester, a number of students have regularly attended this, and I'm very glad that there have been students here. And please join me in a round of applause for the students who have been attending in the name of intellectual curiosity. And let's also please keep clapping for our assistants from ITS to keep this on Zoom and running smoothly. Thank you, especially Mari and Dan. Before starting, we've got a few announcements. First, this is the last forum of the spring 2024 season and, in fact, the academic year. Thank you very much to all of this season's speakers. There are also a few other events to announce. First, next week, of course, there's not going to be a forum. If you show up, you're going to be here all alone, and there's also not going to be any coffee or tea for you. Today, from 5 to 6 p.m. in the Scholes Project Room will be the closing reception for the Art History Bones and Stones class Pray for Them exhibition. Also later today at 6 p.m. in the Miller 300 Dance Studio will be the Composition 2 showing from some AU dance students. Tomorrow at 7:30 in Miller Theater, the Pop Ensemble will hold their spring concert, and also since a member of the libraries is giving today's forum, it seems appropriate to remind everyone that if you have any books taken out from the library, they must be returned no later than Monday. Finally, on May 4th, starting, and that's a while from now still, but that is when senior shows will be starting at 4 p.m. And so continue to look out for announcements for that. Without further ado, today's forum will be given by Laurie Lounsberry Meehan, our University Archivist, and she's going to be telling us about some of the history of Alfred University. And I'm a sucker for old pictures, so I hope there's a lot.
Thanks, John. So there are lots of pictures. So this entire slideshow is all pictures. So if you can't see well, I'll encourage you to come on down front. So stories. This presentation really was prompted by a conversation I had with Glenn Zweigart, who's wonderfully here in the audience. We were touring campus to get the history behind a number of his sculptures. And I learned a lot about some stories that I didn't know about, and it got me thinking. Stories. So we are surrounded by stories. And stories come to us through many ways, related person to person. In former days, picture your mind sitting around in the evening after dinner, around the fireplace, the hearth, family stories. We have a lot of oral history. And so you're going to see 4 hearths in this presentation, so keep your eye out for them. And again, think about stories told around the fireplace. Stories, of course, can be found in memorial plaques, architecture, sculpture, building names, in the buildings themselves, in the landscape, among other ways. So those are the kinds of things I'm going to try to, through some stories, tell you about our campus today. There's a story waiting to be told in this photo. Like, wow, isn't that great? Looks like this cow wants to tell us a story, right? I could see just a thought bubble coming off from there. Like, what's that story? And wonderfully, someone in the audience told me a story related to cows in Alumni Hall that fits in perfectly with the fact, and I'm not going to tell you the full story of this yet, there's a current campus ghost story that a cow haunts the brick. Honestly, the students know this ghost story, pass along, but it ties in exactly with the story, completely unprompted, told it to me just a few minutes ago. So Caroline Littell took this photo in 1984, and just a little prompt, starting next Thursday, there will be an exhibition of Caroline's photos in Scholes Library. Caroline was a wonderful, very talented photojournalist. So this talk is also going to give you a glimpse inside the head of Laurie Lounsberry Meehan. So you'll have a little sense of what I think about as I walk everywhere, knowing different histories as I do. So it's all images, so be ready to focus on the screen. It might feel at times like a whirlwind. I am not going to linger. I'm going to roll right through. I want to make sure I leave time at the end for stories and questions. And to me, history is stories. And history are layers, are connections, are intersections. So my goal is to peel back like layer by layer, right? To me, history comes in layers. We see what we see right now, but let's start to peel it back and discover some hidden stories that are in plain sight. I always think about this scene. This is from the movie Shrek. I'm loving the giggles, so some of you are familiar with Shrek. When I think about layers, I couldn't help but play this. Donkey and Shrek are on their way to rescue the proverbial princess, and they're just starting to get to know each other. Plus, it's the end of the semester, so I thought we could all use a little laugh, a little bit of stress-free moments as we get through the next couple of weeks. But all has to do with our layers.
For your information, there's a lot more to ogres than people think.
Example?
Example? Okay, ogres are like onions.
They stink?
Yes. No.
Oh, they make you cry?
No.
Oh, you leave them out in the sun, they get all brown, start sprouting little white hairs.
No. Layers. Onions have layers. Ogres have layers. Onions have layers. You get it. We both have layers.
Oh, you both have layers. Oh. You know, not everybody like onions.
All right. I have been in some pretty serious meetings and the topic of layers has come up, and I honestly have really had to restrain myself from laughing because that's all I think about is this. Okay, so cornerstones. I think cornerstones are sometimes the most obvious place to start when we talk about history. They often stare us in the face, but have their own secrets tucked inside. We can walk by them every single day, not give them a thought. And they are usually placed in the northeast corner, but in typical outside of ordinary Alfred fashion. Our cornerstones have not been placed in the northeast corner for whatever reason. But so many of you may have had a chance a couple of years ago. We had the opportunity. South Hall was taken down, and we opened up the time capsule that was in the cornerstone. And then the Oppenheim Residence Hall was transformed, renovated, and we also had an opening for the time capsule there. And all the contents are in the archives, which is wonderful. Come see it. Other time capsules in cornerstones. This is the cornerstone in Binsmerrill Hall, and it was placed in 1951. It's glass because of the ceramics and the glass program. And the contents of it were removed during the renovation, and they can actually be seen in the Hall of Glass if you walk down the hallway. So the contents that were hidden are now on display. I'm actually going to switch to a remote mic so I can move a little bit more. Okay, you still hear me? Am I good? Okay. So our two oldest buildings also have cornerstones in them. We can't see them because think about how big the building, Alumni Hall is, how big the brick is, and just how deep those basements are. But in 1851, we can see, this is an article from 1851 talking about how a box, they had gathered some material, put it in a box and deposit it in its place in the capstone in the corner, 15 inches thick. And the capstone weighed about 1 ton. So every time you go by Alumni Hall, picture somewhere in one of those corners, there's a box. Same thing with the brick. In 1858, they started building the brick. And we can see from an 1858 article that they had a lane in the cornerstone of the building. No idea which corner it is or where it is on the brick either, because it's pretty deep. So the brick originally was bigger, different, actually in a different architectural style. So we can think about stories in lots of ways and just changing architectural styles. People would change architectural styles on their houses to reflect the time. So this is the original brick on the left, and then they added a beautiful sleeping porch. It was originally in the Greek Revival architectural style. And then unfortunately in 1932, it had a massive fire and was left with quite a bit of a shell. And then when it was renovated, it is now a Georgian style. And if you haven't stopped to think about, if you were to look at the brick as from an aerial straight down, you would see it's in the shape of a cross, which is an ode to the religious convictions of the people of the time. Oh, I hit the wrong thing. Okay, there we go. We're going to wander down to Main Street. How many times have you driven up Saxon Drive? And have you stopped to look at a plaque? It says class of 1925. So 99 years ago, those columns were put in as a gift from the class of 1925. Looking up Saxon Drive, which at one point was East University Street. If you've ever stopped to think, why do we have West University Street? Where's East University Street? This was originally East University Street. And it actually was a road all the way up to Howell Hall before we became a pedestrian campus in the late 60s. It's a gorgeous shot of Foster Lake. I can't take credit for it, but it's a beautiful photo. So originally called Foster's Folly, like who in their right mind builds a lake on top of a hill? He did, Eddie Foster did. It filled really quickly to everyone's surprise. But the connection intersection, if we go back down to the end of Saxon Drive, all the plantings around the bandstand are to honor Eddie and Alice Foster. So just bring those ties together in our stories because they did a lot of educational, outdoor education, conservation work. So all the plantings around there. If we jump across, it's a nice picture because you can actually see the tree, but it's not a nice picture because there's no leaves. But this is the tree planted in 1936 for the University Centennial. So again, every time you walk by, drive by, there's a bit of history recognizing our centennial, and we're only a dozen years away from our bicentennial. And so this plaque is there with it as a red oak. Stepping back from the tree, we come to the Bartlett Garden just outside of Jordan Hall, which was originally the site of what was called Prexy's Pool. So the foundation, there was a fountain there, some pretty cool student antics, which were appreciated by some and not appreciated by the administration. But anyway, Prexy's Pool was there. It was actually the basement to the building that was there. And then when the building burned down, they used the basement as this pool. Why do they call it Prexy's Pool? Because at one point, coming off the side of the building, at this point, it was Carnegie Library. There was a door right there. And the president's office was right next door. And so Prexy, nickname for the president, could come out his door and could see the pool through his office. And just for information's sake, this big brick building with the livery, so we all had to have horses in order to come to school. And so this was the livery stables. And so the president's office in Carnegie Hall, there's President Davis. You could see Prexy's Pool out the window. And this fireplace, we've got another fireplace hearth, is actually still in the corner of Jordan Hall. I'm still struggling to get it called Jordan and not Carnegie. And if you went upstairs at the time, you would actually be in the library. And so today, you can see these columns were uncovered in the latest renovation. If you stop by the archives, you can come see the original. I have this original desk, plant stand, the chair, tables, and these are in the archives. So when you come see me in the archives, you're seeing a bit of history there as well. Outside of Jordan Hall, written behind the sign, it does still say library, carved right in. And so it's in plain sight, but it actually is hidden. Green Hall. When it was built in 1887, it was proclaimed it was going to be the most beautiful building in Allegheny County. Built from local brick, all the local terracotta architecture. Of course, we've got the beautiful angels built as a storefront. King Alfred, he's got a lot of symbolism in him that you might not know until you walk around and think about him. King of the Saxons. And so the photo on the right is the King Alfred statue in Winchester, England, where he was his home base. in Winchester. So in the Winchester statue, he's older. He is raising his sword in victory, right? He is a king. He has conquered, he's victory, bringing all of his accolades. Our King Alfred, on the other hand, is not. He's young. His sword is in his scabbard, right? It's peacetime. He's not yet a king. He's a scholar. So he's holding his book in a scholar. And if you want to climb up on top and be one of those that decorates King Alfred, he actually has Fiat Lux on top of his book. So hidden in plain sight, we just can't see it. It's a little bit high. So if you can see the yeah, Fiat Lux here. Another ode to King Alfred. How many times, for those of you in the audience, have gone to convocation or commencement? And the faculty marshal walks in and holds the university mace, but we only ever see it from a distance. It's a beautiful piece of artwork, and the top of it is a replica of the King Alfred jewel, which is a very small jewel found in a field in England. The museum in England gave us permission in the 70s. Our local artist made it. It has on the staff of it an AU made in 1970, of course, our seal. Here's Wayne Higbee carrying it. So the next time we're coming up, actually, May 11th, we'll be in the auditorium for commencement. Think about this when you see the faculty marshal walking in with our university mace. Daffodils. What do the daffodils have to do? These are King Alfred daffodils. That's the kind of daffodils they are. The women's club, we used to have the Alfred University Women's Club. They sold them back in the 90s, I think. So a number of people were buying King Alfred daffodil bulbs. So think of those in our beautiful sunshine. We have different places around campus that are tucked away with plaques memorializing someone, usually someone. There are some things memorialized as well. So this is a great little meditation bench tucked away between Alumni Hall and Herrick Library. But if you go in this door, you may not ever stop and say, oh, what's that little plaque right there say? Well, it goes for this meditation bench in memory of Evelyn Oppenheim, which has a great story. We'll save it for another day. You come in Herrick Library. Of course, we have this beautiful room, beautiful conference room. People come around the corner and are like, whoa, I did not expect to see 17th century paneling from an English manor house sits in Herrick Library. If you take the time to look at the mantelpiece, it's beautiful, hand-carved cherub faces. And so it came from an English manor house. It was eventually owned by William Randolph Hearst, who, when he sold his material, went to an auction house in New York City, picked up by a couple that had connection with the university, with the College of Ceramics and the kilns, the Dressler tunnel kilns. They donated to the university. We built onto Herrick Library. We created the archives and put this beautiful room in. But 17th century English paneling. We've got this beautiful little building that sits off behind the Alumni Hall parking lot. And it's called the Gothic for its architectural style. And it's cute, right? It's this nice little building. If you walk around the side, it's got a nice bay window. It's a compilation of the original building, the Gothic, sitting on the site of Herrick Library. It was moved when they built Herrick Library, saved by an alum, Hazel Humphreys, who ran the Box of Books Library. And then if you notice this tree off here on the left, will tie into the tree we have right out front, which I'll talk about in a minute. But you can see the bay window here was on the front, and then now it's on the side. So they took bits and pieces. If we look inside the Gothic, if you haven't had a chance to be in there, what was saved was the chapel section. We had a school of theology that trained ministers. And there's a plaque, yet another plaque over a window in memory of David Michalitz. He died in the Battle of the Bulge in 1945. And David, who loved Alfred. David loved Alfred. He was here for a very short time as part of the Army Specialized Training Program. In World War II and in World War I, the brick was used by the Army. So the brick was full of soldiers marching in regiment to and from classes. So this is World War II. They actually were not on campus for, I think, even a full year. So David loved Alfred in his year, and then unfortunately lost his life in the war. Alumni Hall, I think most of you are aware of the weather vane on Alumni Hall. It's the original weather vane, pine rail fence. So again, sometimes we need to look up. You need to look up to the Village Hall if you're downtown. The weather vane on Village Hall is a firefighter climbing a ladder. But again, until you take the time to stop and look and absorb some of these stories and history around us. The bell, the original bell, used to hang in the steeple. It now sits just inside what I call the front door, but what the Alumni Hall staff call the back door. The story with the bell is that they weren't sure how they were going to get this heavy bell up the steeple. Hiram Burdick, who had come to Alfred, he ran a water cure institute in Alfred, was a very interesting man in and of himself, was a large man. He was known for his strength. He was called Samson at times for his strength. The story is that he put that bell on his shoulders and had the clapper, and he climbed the ladder and hung that bell all by himself. Not sure, but that's the story. And if at one point you wanted to sit in the original Nevins Theater, you would have been in the auditorium in Alumni Hall. So this is the original height. So think about if you're up on the second floor of Alumni Hall, try to picture it being an auditorium much different. At one time it had a pipe organ. They did renovate it. They put in a stage, they put in a balcony. I know some of you in the audience attended Western Civ classes in there. You may have gone to the movie theater by Derek Nevins. The name is carried through into the theater we're sitting in today. So this is from 1891. They're probably getting ready for commencement. Think about the heat. Look at this huge stove in order to heat such a space. Have you ever looked at Alumni Hall and thought, kind of sits a little cockeyed? If you haven't, you are going to now. It's built in the Greek Revival style. I had to write this down because this is not information I was going to really try to remember. It sits 5 degrees to the axis, just as the Parthenon sits on the Acropolis. And the dimensions are the same thing like Greek Revival. The width is slightly more than the length, so 52 feet wide by 100 feet long. And it also has some Palladian architectural style. How many of you have gone out the back path and sort of walked toward Alumni Hall or the library? You probably didn't realize you're actually walking by another story, one of our trees, planted on September 11th, 2002, the 1-year anniversary of 9/11. So this tree here has no plaque on it yet. It's on my list to try to, I think we should get a plaque on this tree. But there's another story there for us to remember. Of course, the Steinheim, right? Full of stories. Means stone home in German. Originally being built by Ida Kenyon, who was the widow of our first President Kenyon. And it was going to be her home, her stone cottage. But never turned out, she never lived there before it was quite finished. It was transferred or purchased probably by Jonathan and Abigail Allen. They expanded it. They turned it into their museum, chock full of artifacts and really fascinating history and stories on the inside. But staring at her face on the outside, there are 3 special stones right over the front door, and then these stones. So the very top stone is a millstone, has a 23 on it. That's the year that President Allen was born. It's also the year the first mill in Alfred. The next stone has a 76. The class of 1876 put this stone on campus as their graduating parting gift to the campus. President Allen embedded it in the building. And then this other top stone is a different millstone as well. And if you just walk in the front door, you might notice right on your right, it looks like a stone is missing, but it's not. This is a Seneca Nation grinding stone that was found in a farm in Allegheny County, given to President Allen, and yet another special stone that he put right in the building. So we aren't here in our Carillon right now. We're waiting for the tower. It needs some restoration work, renovation work. But the original, we're on our second tower. The original tower is this center wooden tower, actually built out of material they would use to make to build oil derricks. And that's because John P. Herrick Library, was one of the major donors, and he was in the oil business. And then in the 50s, we built the steel tower that's not yet enclosed. That got enclosed in the 80s, next to Howell Hall. But the other cool thing about this photo is that it's Howell Hall is also being added on to. So there's a lot going on in this photo we could talk about. This is the White House, or Middle Hall. And so if you think about Susan Howell Hall, if you think about, look at this architecture. The White House sat where the Carillon sits today. So if you never noticed, the Carillon sits on a little bit of a rise and sort of a hump. It's built on top of the foundation of the original White House. So the President Allen and Abigail Allen lived here. It was a massive building. And so just to give it some perspective, we've got Alumni Hall in the center. We've got the Gothic building I've talked about. We've got the original, or the brick. Think about this road in the center. There was a lot of good coasting stories or sledding down stories, some not so great accidents. We've got the White House over on the left. We've got our first observatory. This little building was North Hall. And then look at these pine trees. So if you've ever sung along with our alma mater and nestled away mid Empire State Hills, neath the watch care of Sentinel Pines, these are the pines that our alma mater talks about. The alma mater was written in 1900 to recognize the founding of the College of Ceramics. And then they put these in. Unfortunately, those trees were taken down probably within 5 years of the alma mater being written. The timber business was huge. Another shot of the Sentinel Pines. Pine Hill, of course, is bare. We stripped Pine Hill, as we did many places, because we needed the lumber for so many reasons, and we needed the grazing pasture land. But many students, as they're hiking up around Pine Hill, or they go up around Ann's house, they'll remark that they come across a foundation in the woods, and that's because there were a couple of houses up there. So the foundations are leaving some stories and history for us. So this is I just wanted to point out just a shot of Susan Howell Hall, because none of us have ever seen it, I don't think, before it had its wings put on. But again, modeled after the White House. Many people will see the White House and they think it's Susan Howell Hall when they see photos, but they're not. If we go inside Susan Howell Hall, we've got this beautiful fireplace, yet another hearth. And these tiles, they tell Bible stories. There are, like, this is Matthew 21:2 verses 12 to 14. But these are rare Dutch tiles from the 1600s, right? So those are really old tiles. And then when the hearthstones, Charles Binns made those tiles, and Charles Binns is the one that put this whole hearth together only a couple of years before he died. But just like our conference room in Herrick Library, like, we have some really special things and elements on the inside of our buildings for us to understand and pay attention to. So we did have we have a beautiful Wonder Observatory today, of course, but our first observatory, the Rogers Observatory, was put in during the Civil War in 1863. But we had another one too. It's called Starview. So Starview is down here in the corner. There's some tennis courts. For those of you who might be blocking some of the view, here on Park Street. And so if you ever stop to wonder about why are some of our streets named what they're named, because the Village Park was right here. So this is the park on Park Street. Great photo because a lot of the trees haven't grown up yet. So here's the Octagon House on South Main Street. If you look up around High Street and Hill Street, like, wow, there should be a barn there and farms. Lots to learn from our photos. Okay, back to the camper down Elm Tree. So I pointed the one out. There used to be one in front of Herrick Library before Herrick Library was built, when the Gothic was there. And so these are Camperdown elms. They come from the Camperdown estate in Scotland. They don't just grow on their own. They have to be grafted and intentionally planted. And so here it is in front of Kenyon Hall, which is the first building on this site. And we can look down Allen Way. And at one time, there were 2 of them. So it had a twin, but unfortunately, the twin died in the 70s. These trees are not necessarily easy to keep alive. And it's also, this tree has seen some stories of its own. This is Rogers Campus Center, the second building on the site. And somebody managed to be not where they're supposed to be in their car. So Kenyon Hall, again, down here at the bottom, our site, I've got it circled yellow on the top of the tower, was the Ground Observer Corps in the 1950s, part of the Civil Defense Program. And so there was a whole schedule of people who would stay on the top of, would have their schedule looking for airplanes, like to report any potential enemy aircraft in the area. And so you kind of think, Alfred, why in Alfred? Because there were a couple of other observer posts in Alfred as well. But if you think logistically how close we are to Corning, to Rochester, not that really that far from New York City by plane, but the research, the kind of research that was going on in Rochester and Corning in particular during the Cold War, a lot of proprietary secret information. And the other neat thing up here where Perlman Hall is, at the time called Allen Hall, it actually says Alfred on top of the roof. And so you think about pre-GPS days for a lot of pilots to be able to let them know where they are. And back to Kenyon Hall, down behind Rock Park, there's this circle in the ground. Came from right there on Kenyon Hall. And this is one of Glenn Zweigart's installations, the whole Rock Park, but that he was able to save a piece and keep it for us. Additionally, these lintel pieces, you know, they look like they are, I mean, they're sculptures, they're stone, until you know that they came out of this building on campus, as well as this sculpture came from the top of the chimney piece. This was the Agricultural Hall building. It's where Harder Hall is today. And then down here in this front corner, after they demolished this and were doing their deep excavation, they discovered this really big rock in front of Kanakadea Hall. So Glenn again salvaged it, saved it, and found a new home for it. But we can walk by it every day and not know its connection and where it came from. So another shot down Allen Way. We've got Kanakadea, Babcock Hall of Physics, Finns Hall, and the Agricultural School. So to give you a sense of dimensions. Kanakadea Hall was built as the village grammar school. So it's a 2-room schoolhouse. So then if you kind of know that, when you're inside, things start to make sense. It also had a bad fire, burned off the roof. And so for about 100 years, it looked like this without a tower. And so we're fortunate that we have the tower back. Many of us remember Harder Hall with the plaza, and a lot of activities went on in this plaza. But now we have the McGee Pavilion there, made out of terracotta. We also have had some great art on Harder Hall, right? We think about art in Harder Hall, but this student, Bert Payne, in the mid-'80s, did this great installation where he put a saw on the top, and then he also embedded a car right in the side corner. All right, you know you can't get through a talk with me without hearing some terracotta. Of course, we have the beautiful terracotta building on its original site. Keep in mind, so this is about in front of McLean Center. See how close this house is, houses. I'm going to point about that later. And then, of course, the factory behind. Very influential. They also moved this building. So the ingenuity, right, of people and humankind to move buildings just is astounding to me. And it's reported that this building weighs 90 tons. It also has a hearth and a fireplace on the inside. And so over the hearth is this sculpture here. But there's a second one that looks just like it. If you walk 2 doors up, you will see this house with many other terracotta elements in it. That the female figure is down here in the corner. Bert Kenyon created those. He was a modeler. And then we've got the, sorry, I set myself a timer. Come on, go away. Okay. So this was Terracotta Field, so the factory was here. So here's the intersection, the stoplight, 50 years stoplight coming up. We've got McMahon. So we haven't yet built the Pine Hill Suites yet. We're still stopping at Aid. Look at the slope of this. So if you wonder why we have to put 80-foot pylons into Olin Hall and Miller and Scholes Library, that's why. And then we don't yet have the Green Monster coming down into Merrill Field, but just again, how remote Merrill Field was at one point. And amazingly, right, let me go back. So right in, let's see, Merrill Field. Okay, so all the renovation we've done, sitting right here in this clutch of woods. If you were to go behind the first Miller, you can see Merrill Field in the background, are these two cement pillars. They have big bolts sticking out of them. They were put in almost 120 years ago by the Celadon Company as anchors. They were going to be the corners for some pedestals because they were going to put in a tramway to send their product from the factory to the train station and Alfred Station and to bring the raw material from the shale bank to their factory. So they were going to have an elevated tramway. And those tramway supports are throughout the woods. We've Jim Ninos and I have done some great hiking, and we have photographed and GPS marked quite a few of those. And then we had somebody who overlaid those. We had the description of the tramway in a deed to figure out what their plan was. So around 1905, their engineering minds was thinking of this product. If you're down on Main Street, look at this house and this garage. It says JNN 20 in it from John Nelson Norwood, an alum, faculty member, one of our presidents, hidden in plain sight. Little garage, like, wow, Laurie, what's that little garage down there? Well, the story is that one of the men who had the first cars in town built this garage because he was courting the woman who lived across the street. He wanted to go visit her, be able to leave his car without everybody looking at it and all the kids climbing on it. So the story is he built this garage for it. So back on campus, we're in the area of Silen Binns Merrill Hall, but I just wanted to point out in this particular photo, these are the chimneys for the Celadon Company. So if you really wonder about the context of Celadon with our campus and our history and its proximity, I think that helps put it in perspective. Binns Merrill Hall was built for the College of Ceramics, 1900. And then we built Merrill Hall in 1932, Binns Hall, Merrill Hall, two separate buildings. And so this is an overshot of it. And so we've got the Agricultural Hall, we've got Merrill Hall, we've got Binns Hall. And then we decided, we tore down Binns, and so this is today's Merrill Hall. So you can see the original building is just this left-hand side, and then the 1951 edition is here. So when you're on the front of Merrill Hall, walking down the sidewalk on Allen Way, this is the original door to Merrill. It's right here. And so if you look really closely, you can see the different shading in the brick where they filled in the old door. Babcock Hall of Physics, we lost that building to a fire. We built our new Hall of Physics, which is now Seidlin Hall. And then the Seidlin Annex, if you ever look at the sides of it, and you're like, it's kind of a funky, why is it, why would they architecturally do this little thing in the side of it? Because that's the original building. This original research annex was there, and then in the mid-80s, we just built up and around it. Up in the parking lot, up on Marlin Way, sorry, I was going to call it Fraternity Row, in the 70s, some grad students with help of Glenn Zweigart built an amphitheater up there because they thought that would be a nice spot for an amphitheater. If you're ever walking down the sidewalk along the fields, pay attention. Like, why are these curb cuts there? It's kind of weird, like walking along and there's curb cut, curb cut, curb cut, right? If you don't stop to think about and ask some of these questions, it's because at one point there were houses all along there, as well as the Glidden factory and other structures, gas station 1 point, right? Those curb cuts are there because there used to be a structure there, so somebody could pull in. So again, Terracotta Field, Merrill Field. Elm Street, if you ever wonder why Elm Street feels like it's really short, Well, all these houses on Elm Street were tore down except for the one that's left, the Victorian house on the Alfred State campus. But they tore all those houses down to build Alfred State. Another funky street thing, if you're ever looking at a map on Reynolds Street, and you're like, Reynolds Street, why has that got that really sharp corner? Why don't they just go straight to Main Street? Wouldn't that have made sense? Well, guess who built a garage intentionally in the way so that Reynolds Street could not go straight down, right? Our current day Montessori school was the carriage barn for Crandall, what we call Crandall Hall today. And so if you see, if we had gone straight through, it would literally have gone right through. So the story is that was built intentionally to keep Reynolds Street from meeting South Main Street. Okay, so that was a quick history. Thank you. Questions, comments, and stories? So we started with a cow. I had to end with cows. So that's really why I chose this, because we've got the cows looking over the village. But again, I hope that just this little taste gives you some ideas and some thoughts as you walk around to like, oh, let me stop and look. Let me think. Let me ask a question. Peel back those layers of history, right? History's around us, wonderful stories around us. So we do have some time. We have a mic, I think. Okay, John's got one.
As I bring it to somebody, there is a question on Zoom.
Okay.
From Danny Gagney to Laurie, this was so awesome. We have several buildings that have fallen into disrepair or disuse that I'm so sorry they will go the way of South Hall. Are there any updates on the Steinheim with the bats or the Caroline?
I'm not going to say I'm an authority to give the answer to those. I know the Caroline, there is fundraising going on. It's just structurally, there's enough rust in it that I understand. So I think it's a safety issue. I don't think the bells aren't going to fall down. But, and then the bats, they are still working to try to identify the bats and put up bird houses or bat houses to try to get them out of there. So I have full faith that that we're not going to lose those buildings. But okay, Doug, and then I'm hoping Sherry is willing to tell her story, because she's going to wrap up to the connects to the story of the why the students think that there's a ghost haunting the brick. Doug.
So we're on.
We can hear you.
Okay. We're on Pine Hill, and if you go north a bit, the hill across from that is known as Sugar Hill. What do you know the hill opposite south of here? No, how is it known to you? What was it called?
So you're talking about
where Harold Snyder's farm would be?
High
Street, Hill Street.
Yeah, well, Place Hill, there's been a couple of different names.
Our dad called it Sam Hill.
Sugar Hill is known Sugar Hill because Abel Burdick at one point was a petite man, but the amount of maple syrup that he was able to produce in a year was outstanding, especially for the time and the technology. But it's known Sugar Hill because of the maple syrup and maple sugar.
Why didn't they want Reynolds Street to meet Main Street?
I think that if your house is right there, you don't really want, not everybody wants to have a street built right next to your house and the traffic and whatever. So we have a lot of place names, like why is Jericho Hill called Jericho Hill? We've got Goose Pasture, we've got Five Corners. Sherry.
I told Laurie this story before her talk. When I saw the picture of the cow, I thought she was talking about the fall of 1962, when those of us who were taking as freshmen, Western Civ sat alphabetically in the auditorium in Alumni Hall. And I sat next to a gentleman named Brian Butts. And those of you who know my background know that was my maiden name, Butts. And he ring-led getting a cow, a lady, cattle, animal, bovine, at the not yet burned Alfred State Ag Tech barn down on North Main Street, just outside the village where the Alfred State motor pool stuff is now. And he and two other people walked that animal up through the village into Alumni Hall, up the stairs and onto the stage. And we arrived at Civ that morning with Gift Cook, who was a university employee, trying to coax that lady down off the stage. She didn't mind going up, but she definitely did not like going down. And she had to get down off the stage, and there was there were meadow muffins everywhere.
And so that little bit of not wanting to come down the stairs is why the ghost story, cow ghost story, the brick comes about, is because students have heard of these pranks. I've seen 19th century references as well to cows, going upstairs Alumni Hall. So think about a cow's leg and how they're articulated. It is very difficult for cows to come down the stairs. So why supposedly a cow haunts the brick is because you can't get the cow, if you can't get the cow out of the building and down the stairs, what do? You slaughter it in the building. Right? And so any student who wants to know if that's true, I have to no. Think about the process, think about the mess, think about a lot of things. Yeah, no, they did not. So it's a fun story.
That cow is not the only animal in Alumni Hall. Back in the 50s, all 350 freshmen were required to take Western Civ, and some wise guy brought in a shoebox some mice, which he put into Alumni Hall, creating some havoc. Two comments I want to make, and then a question to you. One comment has to do with the King Alfred statue, which was designed and ultimately, of course, made by Bill Underhill. You showed us the original Winchester version of that, and then in the current version, you see that King Alfred is holding a book. Initially, Bill Underhill had assumed it would be a sword, and then for political reasons, having to do with the idea that the sword kind of represented militarism, that was changed to the book. Point number two, in Kanakadia Hall, which was renovated in the year 2000, we tried as best we could to restore, or at least preserve some of the wood sections that were designed back in 1906 after the fire. And if you go into Kanakadia Hall, you will see certainly the stairway, which was preserved. Most of the rest of it, of course, has been changed. My office, which is in the basement, used to be the women's restroom. And thirdly, I just have a question for you, and that is that some of the names have been changed. So, for instance, Oppenheim Hall is now called Connors Hall. Carnegie Hall is now called Jordan Hall. What is as a car archivist, what is your reaction to the changes?
Good question. So I think as an alum of the university, I think I have a harder time with it, right? Because there's the sentimental, but Allen Hall, Perlman Hall, used to be Allen Hall. You've got, Reimer, Moskowitz used to be Reimer. And so I think the more those of us who know more about and have the longer connections, it's harder. But I think the job of the archives, right, is to keep track of our history and to keep those overlays and to keep the connections. I think it's standard practice to change names. So I suppose professionally, I can't really balk at it. We do need to maintain them. And it's the sort of the price we pay is to change the name and honor somebody else. But from the heartstrings, I trip up because so many names just in my 35 years on campus, have been changed and probably more will. But yeah, I think it's, it's what time does. It's what happens.
I'm going to bring the mic for the sake of the Zoomers. You're right.
Thank you, Laurie. Am I right in thinking that Crandall Hall is the only bit of the university that's on the other side of Main Street? And if so, why is that? Why is it like that?
Well, over time, the university has owned various properties here and there in the village. Crandall Hall, for whatever reason, we still own. It was the president's, it was given to, it was gifted to the university. And then our presidents used to live there. And so it was the president's house until we built the current president's house up on Pine Hill in the mid-60s. And then it became our admissions office. Marcom offices were in there. We retained it over the years for office space, but we've owned other properties in the village, and we still do. Well, I mean, throughout the village, so it's not just the east side of Main Street. I don't know if that answered your question. I mean, I don't know the exact answers to like. Crandall Hall was also built in 1851, same year as Alumni Hall. So we technically do own two buildings built in 1851. But it was the president's house for 65 years or so, probably.
I have two questions. One on that same line, there is like a Greek house kind of at the top of Terrace, I believe.
Mm-hmm.
Is that for Alfred State, and why is that in the middle of our campus?
Well, it's in the village, so like our campus bounds don't go that far. It was for years. We can actually see it in this photo. So you're talking about this house right here, right? And so it was originally a private home, as they all were. There's the farm and the barn and everything right around it. And so it was for a long time owned by one of our sororities who formed, I think they formed in the 30s, 20s or 30s, Theta Chi. And then when we shut down our Greek system in 2002, and the students all graduated, and then the houses, different things happened to them. But it's been recently purchased by an Alfred State fraternity, but it's not on our campus. It certainly has a connection to our campus history as part of our Greek system.
Okay, and then my follow-up was, I'm curious, I live up on Pine Hill.
Okay.
And I was told the house across from me was once the president's house, Elizabeth's house, and I don't know her address. It's the first house on the right when you come up.
Elizabeth Galachi's house?
Yes. Was that ever a president's house?
Okay.
Okay.
Sherman, do you know temporary house for, I mean, while we were building our current one? Yes.
Okay.
On my way with the mic.
A bit more to the Elizabeth Gulachi temporary house was her front yard doesn't grow very well because there used to be a circular driveway in the front yard.
Nice. That's what happens, a lot of gravel and stone or put in your lawn.
As an alum, do you miss South Hall?
I never even, as a student, because South Hall was closed when I was here. I mean, I miss it for a lot of reasons. Sure. I mean, the beautiful terracotta roof, its history, being built as the town, originally grammar school and then the central school. I can be collectively, personally disappointed that we have some beautiful historic buildings that we're just not able to maintain. Because collectively, they tell such a history. I mean, just think about our quad, and we think about cornerstones. If we thought Alumni Hall, the brick, Canacadea, and the Steinheim sort of as the cornerstones of or the original bit of campus, but just how much history people feel instinctively, I think, by visiting our campus, right? There's this sense that just pervades us. And so I appreciate it over time. We're keeping track of that history when we do renovations to keep a feel here. But yeah, with limited resources, I understand we can only do so much, but yeah, I would love, I love Steinheim. I love it. It's so beautiful. I want people to be able to see it. There's so many things about our campus and our history that I want to be able to share that people really engage with. And I think the more that we engage and tell our stories, more people connect and identify, and then it gets in their heartstrings. And that's what we want.
One more thing about the observatory on Kenyon Hall. We had a talk at the Bakersbridge Association recently by Chris Romanchuk, and he talked about how the telecommunications systems in the United States the frontiers of both of those systems were in Allegheny County. So the Western Union
Telegraph?
system
Yeah.
and the AT&T system kind of merged. There was a point where so that they were could have been a target for foreign things. And so there were observation decks. And I wondered whether the Kenyon Hall thing was perhaps related to that, although that would have been earlier.
Yeah, so that was the early 50s that we had the observation post, and there was an observation post I know on East Valley. And I've seen reference to in Mullen Road. So I think there's probably multiple reasons, certainly. I mean, there's a whole network of Ground Observer Corps. But yeah, I think there's probably multiple reasons as to why Alfred, had them, certainly.
Well, it is 10 after 1 for anybody who has an appointment, but I'll bring the mic over for one last question.
Hi. I'm just curious, do you have any personal favorite bits of history from around campus?
Well, there's a fun one related to the early history of the libraries. So Melville Dewey came to Alfred for a semester, and it was one of those I never stopped to think about, why did Melville Dewey come to Alfred? But it was because he was best friends with somebody who was Seventh-day Baptist, and so. But that's and then Melville Dewey helped, was one of the convincers of Andrew Carnegie. Big different story there. But in Kenyon Hall, in 1887, that's when the first library, sort of official university library, was really put together. We had a campus library in Alumni Hall, and then each of the lyceums, which were the early student organizations, had their own libraries. And then they finally said, you know what, why don't we all come together and have one campus library? And so in 1887, the decision was made to move the library into Kenyon Hall up on the second floor. But they infringed on the space of a faculty member who had his offices and laboratory there. And so he was not going to have it. So they moved stuff in, and then he promptly threw everything out the window, or as much as he could. He's like, no, it didn't work for him. The library stayed there. But it's one of my favorite photographs. There's a photo of two women who are organizing the library. Melville Dewey became the state librarian, but he's also the head of the library program at Columbia. And so he sent two women to come to Alfred to organize our library. And they're in their typical 19th century. They're in their hats and their gowns, but they're organizing the library. So, library and archives are close to my heart, but they're all fun. I find enjoyment in so many of the stories. And particularly as I learn more, I'm always learning more as I hear from other people who have had stories in history to connect and explain, it just energizes me. And I know that many of the students I talk to, just their eyes light up when they hear these stories. And so I think the more that we can do that, I think the more that we can keep our history active and alive and tell our stories and share them, because we're creating stories every day. And we want to continue for another 200 years.
Thank you.
Welcome.
Please join me in thanking Laurie again.